Today I want to go back to the area of automated testing. Now, if you go to Moodle and go into the automated testing section, so I've just published a new set of slides, which I want to try and get through today. And a lot of what we've learned already in relation to testing applies no matter what level of testing that we're doing. Today, I want to talk about what's kind of now referred to as end-to-end testing or E2E testing. Previously, it was referred to as system testing or application testing. So they all refer to the same testing level, as I'm calling it. When you talk about system testing, as the name suggests, you're testing the entire application or the entire system as a whole. So if our system or our application is a web application, then the whole consists of the user interface, the server side, which we kind of refer to as a web API. We'll be doing web API development in the web dev module. There's more than likely a database as well. There could even be another web API here, which the server side is talking to. But you're testing the entire application as one entity, if you like. And so the kind of concerns when you're talking about system testing, you're obviously trying to ensure that the functionality of the system is as it should be. And that's what our focus is going to be. So you're testing the application from the user's perspective, assuming that there is a user interface. Other concerns would be performance testing and load or stress testing. Now, we won't look at those, but they are in real life an issue. Certainly if your application is operating over a network, it's some sort of distributed application, then it's that the application's ability to deal with large workloads, where a large workload might mean, tens of thousands of users using the application simultaneously. How well does it actually perform in those kind of situations? The functionality might be fine, but the performance may not be great. And so you'd have to address that, but we're not. We're just going to focus on functionality. When we talk about end-to-end testing, stroke system testing, we often use this term, a black box, taking a black box.
Sir, we cannot watch your screen.
Oh, good. Thought I did a screen share.
Yeah, that's working now.
Yeah, great. You can see it now, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Right. Even though I was going through some slides, the talking was doing everything, I hope. So anyway, let's see. That's assuming you were listening to me, of course. Right. So we're doing system testing or application testing. Now tend to refer to it as end-to-end testing. And in system testing, you're treating the entire application as an entity, if you like, where the entire application is probably made up of these parts here, right? There's user interface, server side, database, but you're not really interested in the internals. You're just interested in the entire application. And what you're interested in is the functionality, number one, for sure. Does the functionality work from the user's perspective? In real life, you would be concerned with, does the performance work, or does the application work from a performance perspective and from a heavy load perspective? But we're not dealing with those aspects in this module. This is kind of where I left off. So we use this term black box approach towards end-to-end testing or system testing. And what where that kind of notion comes from is you treat the application as a black box. A black box is something that you can see the internals of it, but you know if you provide certain inputs to the box, then based on the overall application specification, it should generate a certain output. So again, it's that if I give it inputs, then I expect it to respond in a certain way or to output in a certain way. So this notion of expectations is part of the vocabulary again. But the black box idea is when we are doing system testing, the assumption, of course, is that we have preceded it with unit testing and possibly integration testing. And during those earlier testing phases, you would hopefully have ironed out or solved many of the internal problems in the application. And so that being the case, when you come to end-to-end testing or system testing, hopefully anyway, there shouldn't be any problems with the internal workings. Now you're just addressing it from in a kind of a black box approach because you know the internals of the black box is working. So you're just saying, if I give it inputs, then I expect it to generate certain responses or outputs. As well, I'm saying that the application may have certain expected side effects. An example of a side effect would be where it updates a database. And clearly we should check to ensure that it did carry out the appropriate update to the database. That would be part of the expectations of the application when you're talking about system level testing. Now, if our application is a web application, then by its nature, it's asynchronous because it's operating across a network. Hopefully, when you're writing your tests, you shouldn't have to build that asynchronous aspect into your test code. Hopefully, whatever testing framework you're using will take care of that. And that is the case in our case. But we still need to be aware of it in the background. And if problems arise, then it may be because of this asynchronous characteristic. If we're focusing in now, though, on web applications, because as I said at the outset, system testing or end-to-end testing, the nature of the application could be anything really. But if the nature is a web application, then clearly we are targeting the application from a browser perspective because that's its interface. And in terms of functionality, we're talking about, well, we're still talking about functionality of our web application, as in if the user interacts in a certain way, then the application should respond in a certain way. Other issues submitting forms, that's clearly a characteristic of web applications. Navigation is a characteristic of web applications. These are all things that we need to test to make sure that they're working, as well as the core functionality. By flows, I mean, if you think of your standard shopping cart type web application, where you're going through the checkout procedure, that tends to be you go from one screen to the next screen to the next screen. We describe that as a kind of flow, and you would need to test that the flow is working as expected. There aren't any flows in the Movies app that you're developing, the other module, but that's okay. Another aspect of web applications when you're talking about end-to-end testing is the visual side of it, which is usually kind of the CSS. Now, that's clearly very important, but we won't be actually looking at that. We'll be mainly concerned with functionality and these kind of issues here. In terms of technology, then, see here, Mocha is still actually part of the stack, which is great, as is Chai, possibly. Now, historically, there was a framework or platform called Selenium, which was very popular in the industry, but it was a little bit unpredictable in terms of its execution, and that really came back to the area of asynchronicity. But it was very popular for a number of years, if not decades. Now, more recently, a framework called Cypress has come on the scene, and that's the one that we're going to be using. And I've used Selenium, and I've used Cypress, obviously, and the whole experience using Cypress is much better than Selenium. So our kind of technology stack will be Cypress plus Mocha predominantly. Cypress, how do you install it? It's just an npm install. So you actually add it to your packets.json for your web application. So, you know, you've probably submitted this command before. That's just going to install the Cypress tool for us. And when you run Cypress on your web application, the first time you run it, it's going to create a folder, some folders and files in your web application. So on the left there, I'm showing you, it's actually a screenshot from the Movies app, because we're going to use that as the context for our exploration of the Cypress framework, and we're going to use it in the labs. But when you run the Cypress tool initially within your web application, it creates this folder called Cypress, and that has a number of subfolders. It also creates a configuration file down here. Now, if this is where we're going to be doing the majority of our coding, if you like, our testing, our Cypress test coding. And, you know, there's a subfolder here called E2E, and that's where we're going to put our end-to-end Cypress test files. The fixtures folder is where you would put test data if that were an issue. It actually doesn't arise in our case because we're going to be getting a lot of data from TMDB directly, but that's where you should put your test data. The support folder is where you'd put any utility code. We will actually define one or two functions and put them into the support subfolder with the understanding that those functions could potentially be required by more than one of our end-to-end test files. And okay, that's the kind of folder structure that Cypress works with. And then on the right there, you can now see I've actually written some end-to-end tests for the Movies app. And it's more than a convention really, but the actual files, they all have this .cy.js extension. So that's what Cypress expects to find. It goes looking for files inside in the E2E folder called or with a .cy.js extension, and it will run those files for you. So they contain our test code, our Cypress test code. The Cypress tool itself comes with a command line, two command line tools really, two CLI tools. And this is how you run them. So if you run this command, you're essentially running a graphical user interface tool, a GUI tool that Cypress provides. And we would be using this GUI tool when we want to run our Cypress tests locally on our desktop. If you want to run all of your tests without having to interact with them, which the GUI allows you to, then we can run this command. This is often referred to as headless testing. You're not really interested in interacting with the tool at all. You just want to run all the tests, and we will be using this command as well. Not so much immediately, but a little bit down the line. Let's see, what does a Cypress test look like? So this is a kind of a made-up example now. Supposing I've got this very simple web app, and the idea is if you type, it keeps a list of my to-do, the work that I need to do. And so it's the way it works is this is meant to be a text box. If I type a to-do into or a task into my text box and hit return, it'll be added to my list of to-dos here. So it's a very simple web app. And I just type again, hit enter, that's entered, that's added to my list. So I want to check, does this very trivial app work? And I want to write some Cypress tests for it. So here's what a Cypress test might look like. And surprise, surprise, it's got describe blocks and it blocks and before blocks or before hooks and before each hooks. They're not used here. So this is evidence of the fact that Cypress is using Mocha internally. Now, the Cypress part then is this stuff here, right? So, okay, it's the first time you've seen any Cypress code, but what's nice about it is it's kind of declarative. The very first Cypress statement, what its effect is to navigate my browser to a particular URL. So cy.visit will actually set the browser's URL to this path, and assuming that I'm running my my little to-do app there on the left, let's say it was written in React, and I'm using the Create React App server. So, and I've started up my Create React App server. If my test executes this command, now, by the way, sorry, Cypress tests run inside a browser tab. And if that's the case, then this is going to set the browser's tab URL address to localhost 3000. So it's actually going to display my to-do page in the browser tab. The next statement, what I'm trying to get across here is I want to type to-dos into the text box, or I want my test to do that. cy.getInput, the way you interpret that is you're asking Cypress to go find an input element on the browser, where an input is my text box, obviously. And there is a text box, only one text box in the browser at the moment. So this expression cy.getInput is actually going to position the cursor on this text box. And I'm chaining on a .type command. And surprise, surprise, what that is going to do is type something into the text box. So it actually types this into the text box. The curly braces enter is a way of getting Cypress to simulate hitting the return key. So when Cypress executes these two lines here, what you will see in the browser tab is watch lecture appearing down here, because we've just hit enter, so it's added to the to-do. And I'm typing another, I'm getting Cypress to add another to-do. Next, I'm getting Cypress to, now let's assume, I have to tell you these assumptions, let's assume these to-dos here are represented as a list of li elements within an UL element from a HTML point of view. So what this expression here is going to do is it will cause Cypress to go looking in the browser tab for all occurrences of li elements. So it's actually going to, this expression is going to return an array, whereas this expression up here only returned one element because there was only one input or text box. So this is going to return an array. And what I'm doing here is, you know, you kind of work it out. I'm checking to see, or I'm making an assertion, is the length of the array equal to 2? Is the length of the array equal
You can come up
to
if
2?
you want.
Which it should be.
Oh, Griff.
I've only
Oh,
added
yeah, Griff don't have a car.
to the
Yeah, I might. Because he's got an e-bike now, so.
Sorry, somebody has
Yeah,
their.
I don't know if he's cycle all the way out of here. Maybe he will.
Anyway, go together, because that means at least very much.
Yeah, well, I won't be really. I could take the bike, but Commerce are a long way from here.
Can people mute their mic?
Yeah, yeah,
I was thinking next year, I was like, I'll take the bike. And I was like,
Give me a second.
I'll take the bike.
Okay, hopefully that's turned it off. Let's see. Where was I? Okay, here. So what we're doing here is getting Cypress to find all the LI elements and check are there only 2 of them there, making an assertion, in other words. So this is what a Cypress test code looks like. And hopefully, you know, it's certainly declarative in style, and I think it's reasonably intuitive. Now, you obviously have to build up experience of the syntax, but as a first look at it, it looks quite nice from a programming point of view. There's a lot of method chaining going on when you're using Cypress. Method chaining is just a programming idea. So, you know, when you've got this expression here, I'm chaining the type method onto my invocation of the get method. And that's the programming style that we'll see a lot with Cypress. But that's what it's referred to as method chaining. So what you saw on the previous screen was a number of Cypress style statements, and they all have this structure to them. There's the command part, and then there's the assertion part, where the assertion part is actually optional. Many of the statements only have the command part. And the command part always begins with CY. So CY is just a global object that Cypress creates. And then you invoke commands on that CY object. And the purpose of the commands are nearly always concerned with trying to find a particular HTML element on the web page that's currently displayed in the browser. Okay, so they're all the commands are all about navigating or interacting with the browser's DOM data structure. By interacting, we saw on the previous screen when we typed something into the text box, that was an example of interacting with the DOM element. Now, there are a whole series of these commands, and really, I'm not going to go through them one by one, obviously, because there are too many. You would need to look up the documentation. But hopefully from the labs next week, I'll give you enough examples of commands, and that should be sufficient for you to write pretty much any test that I would need you to write, any Cypress test. We've already seen the get command. Now, what it returns is either one DOM element or an array of DOM elements. If I go back to the previous screen, cy.get input, because there was only one text box, that returned a single DOM element. Whereas here, when I asked it to get all LI elements, there were more than one. In that case, it returned an array. So it could be either or. The contains command, that you could use that if you're looking for an element that has a particular piece of text within it. So that's pretty straightforward. That's an example of it there. The find command is where you've already identified, you've already got Cypress to pick out a particular element within the DOM, but then you want to look at children of that element. So if you take this example here, this looks like I'm asking, or I'm getting Cypress to identify the form element within the current web page. So it must be displaying some sort of a web form. First of all, ask it to actually find the form tag or the form element. Now, clear, if you know HTML, so you know that nested within a form element, there will be the various fields on the form. So the find here is looking for, it looks like it's looking for a select element, kind of a drop-down menu, but it's the select element within the form that I'm looking for. There may be drop-down elements somewhere else on the page, but they're outside the actual web form. So this is a way of getting Cypress to identify a DOM element that is a child of some other element. Well, just for completeness, all I'm doing here then is this is picking out the drop-down menu within the form, and I'm assuming there's only one. And this is interacting with that drop-down menu, picking a particular entry on the drop-down menu. So that's find. Click, clearly enough, is a way of clicking a DOM element, as in clicking a button, if you're doing over here. The EQ command, you'll see me using that a lot. That becomes useful when, for example, CYGET returns an array of elements. So the EQ I'm saying here, it gets a DOM element at a specified index in an array of elements. So if we look at the example, cy.get input, let's assume here now that there are multiple text boxes currently displayed on the browser's web page. And we want to get the third text box. It begins with subscript 0. So EQ2 here will pick out the third text box in the array of text boxes that has been found by Cypress from this part here. And then I'm typing, it looks like I'm typing something into that particular text box. Where was I? Sorry. Here. Yeah. Here's another example. Get all the LI elements, pick out the third LI element within the array, and I'm making an assertion as to what that LI element should contain. And if any of these commands fail, so take the simplest example. If take this one here, where I'm asking Cypress to find an element, could be of any type, within the current web page that's being displayed by the browser that contains the text welcome. Now, if there isn't any element with the text welcome, then this statement is going to fail, and consequently, the test is going to fail. So that's how failure occurs in a Cypress test. Also, of course, failures will occur if an assertion is actually not true. So down here, I got an assertion, and if that assertion isn't true, then the test fails as well. This is just a screenshot from the online documentation that comes with Cypress, which is quite good, actually. So if you want to, I don't think you need to, but you may need to, as part of the assignment maybe that I give you. If you want to see what other commands are available there, then go to this web page, click on the API in the header, and then click on the commands link on the tab on the left. And this is just a subset of some of the commands that are available to. We'll only be able to look at a small subset of them in our labs, but there are lots of other ones there as well. Now, so here's the Cypress statement structure again, command followed by an assertion. In the command part, though, you need to specify what's called a selector. And the selector is what Cypress uses to determine which particular DOM elements are you asking it to identify within the web page. And the way you specify the selector, there are a number of ways you can specify a selector. You can specify the ID of the DOM element. And we know that identifiers are going to be unique, so that would always return a single instance. So for example, here, I'm asking Cypress to find the DOM element that has the ID of heading. Alternatively, the selector might be express some CSS class name. And if it is, then you prefix the class name with a dot. So Cypress is interpreting this to as go look for the DOM element or elements that contain this CSS class, or that have this CSS class as an attribute. Alternatively, the selector might just specify the type of DOM element or the tag, HTML tag. So this is saying find all the buttons on the web form, or the buttons on the web page, sorry. HTML tags can have attributes. So this expression here, what we're saying here is find all of the buttons that have the type attribute set to submit. That will more than likely return 1, but it should more than likely should only return 1. There should only be one submit button on any web page. And okay, we're just clicking it. But the syntax is what I'm trying to get across here. So it's the HTML tag type, and in brackets then the particular attribute of that tag that you wanted to focus in on. So a lot of CSS libraries often attach the data test attribute to HTML elements, and that data test attribute actually is specifically for testing frameworks like Cypress. We'll see, I think we might see 1 or 2 instances of the data test attribute. It's not of any relevance to the browser in terms of how it renders or displays something on the browser viewport. It's there specifically for testing purposes. The ent child is another type of selector. It's more command than selector really, but and you will see me using it. So if we look at the example here, right, I'm saying, first of all, I'm telling it, well, here's my objective. Let's supposing I've got a web page that is displaying a table, and I want Cypress to get the 8th column and the 3rd row within that 8th column. So I'm picking out a particular cell within my table. Maybe I want the test to make an assertion about the contents of the cell, or I want to type something into the cell. Either way, how would I actually express this in Cypress? And I'm showing you here. I'm assuming now you're familiar with HTML table tags. So there's the T-body tag that will just pick out the table itself. And within the table, I'm asking it to find all the table row elements within the table. Specifically, I'm telling it to get the 3rd row because it starts at subscript 0. And within that 3rd row, I'm asking it to pick out the 8th column in the row. So that entire expression will pick out the particular cell that I want to get here. And this is a very good example now, again, of meta chaining, that kind of programming style. Hopefully that doesn't throw you, that programming style. And all of these selectors can be combined. So, you know, if you're If you're looking for a particular type of tag with a particular class, then the way we might express it is, do I have an example of that? Yeah, here, right? Here I'm saying, I'm asking Cypress to find a div that has the container class attribute associated with it, the container CSS class associated with it. Again, there may be more than one, but so I'm combining CSS and tag in this selector, combining CSS and HTML tag. So that's selectors, and again, that's part of learning Cypress, becoming familiar with the selector syntax, as well as becoming familiar with some of the commands, and thirdly, the assertion syntax. So you've written your tests and you want to run the tests, and what's really made Cypress so popular is the fact that the tests are repeatable, and they are deterministic, and they're kind of flake free, as in no matter how many times you run them, they will behave the exact same way every time, or pretty close to exactly the same way every time. And that's particularly important if the nature of the application is asynchronous, which is something I'm going back to every now and again. And that is the case in the case of web applications. The Selenium framework, which was a predecessor to Cypress, it wasn't as good on that count. So, so the main features of the Cypress test runner I'm seeing here is that it tests run inside the browser, number one. Now that can be very useful. If the tests are actually running inside the browser, then you have access to all of the browser's resources, like its local storage, its cache, its cookie store. You even got access, well, obviously you've got access to the DOM, because the Cypress is all about accessing and manipulating the DOM, or interacting with the DOM. But you've got access to the other, should you need to access the other resources within your test code, like the local storage and the cookie store. I'm saying number two, that Cypress, I'm saying here, is framework agnostic. So it doesn't know anything about React or any of the other web frameworks, because what Cypress understands is the browser's DOM structure. And all of your Cypress testing is relative to the DOM, and the DOM is native to the browser. So we can use Cypress with a React app, or if we were writing an Angular app or a Vue app or any other web app framework, then Cypress will work with those as well. I'm saying here that it's flake free, which I've already kind of spoken about, so I won't go over that again. One aspect of it though is, if you've got a command in your Cypress test that says, find a particular DOM element or collection of DOM elements, and the DOM element isn't there. Now, it may not be there because the browser is still loading the page and building the DOM inside the browser. And this is, again, going back to the asynchronous nature of web apps. What Cypress will do is, if it doesn't find the DOM element that you're asking it to find, it will try a number of times. It'll delay and then retry looking for that DOM element. So it's aware of the fact that the DOM is something that is being built by the browser, and it will wait kind of for the browser to complete that building process. So that aspect of Cypress is what makes it deterministic and repeatable. In one execution of a test, the particular line in your test that's looking for a DOM element, the DOM element may not be there. So it'll retry a second time. May still not be there. It'll retry a third time. I think 3 is the default number of times. And on the third time, it finds it. So that's fine. The next time you run the test, it might actually find the DOM element in question the first time. But from a test execution point of view, the two test executions are the exact same. And that's what the kind of deterministic is referring to. I'll talk about this time travel thing in a second. So I suppose we should try and see something working. What I've got is in my VS Code is I've got the movies app. And so if I expand the source folder, expand the source folder and the components folder, you know, some of these things which should be familiar to you. And I've got my pages folder somewhere. Here's my pages folder. You know, so I've got my home page, my favorites page, etc., etc. So I'm going to start up the app. Before I do that, I look at the Cypress folder, and inside in the E2E subfolder, I've written some Cypress test specs, as they're called. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 test specs or specifications. Anyway, let's start the server, the React server. Okay, and then go back to VS Code. And if I open up a second terminal, and in this terminal, I'm going to run the Cypress GUI test runner. And the way you do that is npx Cypress. Now, again, before I hit return, I've already installed Cypress. And if I look at my package.json, inside in the dev dependency section, there you go. There's my Cypress installation. So because of that, I can now run this command, npx Cypress open. That's going to open up the Cypress GUI. And it's asking me, do I want to run my end-to-end tests or my component tests? We're not going to look at Cypress's support for components testing, but it's there and it's quite good. So no, I'm only interested in the end-to-end testing. And for now, anyway, it runs all the tests inside the Chrome. That's the only option I have to select. Well, Electron is another one, but we're not going that route. So I'm going to go for the Chrome. I want to run my tests inside in Chrome. And what it's listing here now are my test specs. So it's found these inside in my Cypress folder. And if I click on one of them, it's going to run that test. So if I pick this one, let's say. So it's running through the test, and that's why you see it flicking through it here on the right. I go back again, I can rerun that test again. You know, so what's happening is I'm selecting, you can see here, I'm selecting favorites. The test finishes on the favorites page, and it looks like my test selected 2 favorites. If I go back to my test specs and I run the filtering test. That's all about, obviously, testing the filtering functionality. And you saw there as it ran through the tests, you saw the drop-down menu appearing. So, yeah. And if we just briefly glance at the code, there's a lot of code there, so we're not going to spend time stepping through it, not today anyway. If I take the, let's say this one. You know, it's describe blocks and before blocks, etc., etc. And inside in the it blocks, then is where I've got all my Cypress commands. Yeah. So, and we'll be developing those tests in the lab. So that's the screenshot is from the Cypress GUI, and the screenshot is from the running or an execution of one of the tests. And what you're really looking for is what's referred to as the green bar on the left here. The green bar means the test has ran successfully and completed successfully. So we talk about green bar, red bar. If the test fails, which is usually because one of the commands has failed, then you'll get a red bar here instead. And you saw from the test that I ran, you know, we were getting green bar. Time travel thing is a really nice thing. What the time travel does is it allows you to see a snapshot of the state of the browser at a particular time during the test execution. So what the screenshot is showing you here is from the filtering test. And in one of my test cases for checking that the filtering worked, I got the test to type something into the text box. And so I've gone back through what Cypress allows me to do here on the left is to pick out the particular command in my test case that typed something into the text box. And if I click on it, then it will freeze the browser on the right. It'll show you what the state of the browser was at that particular time in the test execution. And, you know, I can probably do that for you here. So if I have 3 it blocks, so that's why we've got 3 tests here. Let's see. This looks like this one actually. There's where we're typing M. So if I just click after it, then we can see here on the right, the M is in the text box, and the list of movies actually that are being displayed is just those that have M in the title. If I click just before that, if I click, let's say here, if I click here, it's just trying to find the text box, or is it? No, maybe if I go back to the one before it. Why is the M still there? Maybe I just rerun it. Okay, I'm not going to go playing with it now, maybe just kind of because I ran out of time. That's okay. Let's just see how far are we on the slides. I can come back to this in the lab maybe with you. Right. I'm not going to try and rush this slide now because this is extremely important. One of the slightly difficult parts when you're using Cypress is working out what selector are you going to use. And what I'm showing you in this slide here is that the dev tools that comes with the Chrome browser is extremely useful for helping you do that. And I've used it all of the time when I was writing those tests that I just showed you there a moment ago. So it's important that you get comfortable using the browsers, the Chrome browser's dev tools to help you come up with an appropriate selector for a particular command in your test code. So I think I'm going to stop there really, and I'll pick up the story perhaps on Tuesday, maybe in the first hour on Tuesday. But again, as before, I will get back to you on that. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. So for now, and I will talk to you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.